Okay, we're going to pick up right where we left off, and we have adjusted our white balance, and so it's pretty close to where we want to be. But if you look at her and her skin tones, the red is 140. It's well below where it needs to be. So what we can do is come down here and zoom in on this picture and grab a hand tool and move her around. I'm going to adjust the exposure, and I'm going to do it by clicking my up arrow, going a little bit at a time. And I have my hand on her forehead, and I'm watching the red values in here, plus watching her skin to see as it's going up. And so on this is probably right around in the 200 range for this image. It's looking like a pretty good exposure. Might even be good to go up a little higher. I'm going to call it right there because I think it's possible to overdo it here. When we back out, we did lose some of the sky, and that's okay. We will work on that in a different tutorial. But the thing is, we were able to recover that. There are other sliders to play with and figure out what they can do for you in recovery. It's going to bring back some of the sky, and I like what that's doing up there. So let's bring in some recovery. Fill light is going to brighten some areas, and that might be a little bit too much. And I think that's going to even allow me to drop my exposure a little bit. Yeah. The blacks, it's preset on 5, but when we raise it, it's going to darken things. So the black isn't going to really help us in this. The brightness is okay. I always like a little bit more contrast. The clarity and vibrance, we touched on vibrance and saturation in a previous tutorial for Photoshop adjustments, but it's always good to have a little more vibrance, a little more saturation. Clarity adds a little bit of sharpness to things, and so if we back out a little bit, it's looking like a much better image. There are a lot of different things that you can do within Photoshop or within Adobe Camera Raw that I don't necessarily do myself. You can make curve adjustments. You can add sharpening, and if your image is not sharp coming out of the camera, or not very sharp, you can oftentimes recover some of that right here in its raw form better than you can do in the picture. So if you know that your image is a little bit soft, I would work on adding some sharpening here. At the same time, if you have a bit of noise, you can reduce the noise right here. Convert to grayscale, I wouldn't do that here personally. I would probably do that in Photoshop, but there's things that you can do to make adjustments. Undo that. Split toning, if you just wanted to make a toned image, maybe even with a black and white. Let me see how it goes. Yeah, there we go. So you just have to work on it, but you have to be really looking for something out of a picture to use some of these tools. Lens correction, I don't use this. Effects, if you wanted to add grain into your image, you should be able to see that there's a bunch of grain here. And sometimes grain is helpful in a black and white image, but we don't need that now. It's possible to set up your camera calibration to have even more accurate images. So there's just a lot of different things that you can do, but you don't necessarily need to do. This first page is what's important right here. Your exposure, recovery and fill if you need it, and if you want to add a little bit of vibrance and saturation. And of course, the most important in a raw image is your white balance. And when you think you have everything all set, all you have to do is open image, and it'll take a second to process, and there we have it. It's ready to work on in Photoshop.